Excellent. Welcome to the TADSummit online conference. This is going to be focusing on voice AI with my two favorite voice AI experts, Rob Pickering and Lyle Pratt. They have presented previously on TADSummit, so I'm just going to link back to some of their great work on the TADSummit podcast and just get straight down to the first question, which is, and I'll start with you, Rob. What's getting you excited at the moment in voice AI?
Okay, two things. First of all, I think there's a lot of excitement about multimedia models and so-called speech-to-speech really landing. Kind of the story of the last 6 months or so in voice AI is, kind of September when Ultravox hit first,
Yeah,
Fixed AI, Justin Bertie's company as it was then. They kind of teased us with really the very first production. You can buy it as an SDK
yeah,
speech-to-speech model. A kind of OpenAI having announced the same thing back in, whenever it was, May, June, and
yeah,
and embedded in advanced voice, but not really giving anyone an API to use it.
yeah.
And then, of course, hot on the heels of that, October, OpenAI dropped, and then Google dropped with Gemini. And the implications of that are quite big because it means that we can start building quite natural voice agents that understand intonation in speech rather than this whole pipeline thing of
Yeah.
transcribing it. And I'm going to bore everyone with an explanation of why it's really different, but that's insanely exciting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of at the front end of the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
We can now plug WebRTC directly into AIs in a low latency way with turn detection that's getting better all the time. And then at the
Exactly.
back end, the way that we're actually crafting the agents that we can build, MCP is starting to change the way that we can make tools available to the AI and the Ragent tools and the ease with which we can kind of add tools. So they're the two things that are getting me really kind of excited at the moment.
Cool.
But there's a whole convergence of things going on around the side that is the whole story of AI and the way it's going to change the kind of the world we live in.
Exactly. Because I think when we were talking about 6 months ago, you know, it's like, and there's a new, and there's more, and there's more. When's this change? When does it start to converge? And it's just been, and there's more, and there's more.
It ain't slowed down yet.
No, not at all. Lyle, what's getting you
Okay.
excited at the moment?
Yeah, I would agree with the speech-to-speech innovations and MCP. MCP kind of came out of nowhere in the
Yeah.
past quarter or two.
Yeah.
Pretty exciting stuff. There's a lot of stuff to be worked out with that protocol, including
Yes.
some recently
Security.
new things like auth and
Yeah.
session management, things like that.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the bigger thing that excites me is potentially just the industry beginning to wake up more as a whole about what's happening with AI voice agents. You hear folks from all the big UCaaS players sort of beginning to talk about how voice AI is going to sort of change the industry. I mean, none of them have released products yet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're a little behind the ball there, but I'm sure they're having a lot of product meetings about, oh, well, can we put a team together to build a solution in this area? Are we going to buy, a
Yeah.
solution from some other provider? But regardless, those companies are beginning to talk about it, and their customers are beginning to ask for it,
Yeah.
which is the most important thing. I think we've been very hopeful about all the speech to speech stuff and have been testing, most of the models quite thoroughly.
Yeah.
I think we're still at the point where most of the speech to speech models are dumber from an intelligence standpoint. There's a lot of optimizations and things that they do behind the scenes to get the model to perform at the latencies that
Yeah.
that people expect. In our experience, if you have more complex use cases, perhaps an agent that has 10, 12 tools available at its disposal to execute functions on. None of the speech-to-speech models perform as well as, the old school, a year old
I know.
pipelining into something like GPT-4. But that gap will be closed, quite quickly, I'm sure. And, the entire industry will improve because of it.
That's good. That's an excellent point. Now, one of the things you mentioned when we were last talking around this is pricing with speech to speech. How have you found that? Has it settled down or is it still variable?
Yeah, as you know, competition has entered the market in the speech-to-speech arena. Prices have begun to come down. I mean, but they're still really high.
Yeah.
OpenAI hasn't released another price drop since I think November on
Mhm.
speech-to-speech pipeline. The OpenAI devs that I've talked to, said that improving the transcription quality that you get back from the speech engine was one of their highest priorities. And then we saw, I guess, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, they released new transcription models based on GPT-4.
Yep.
So they are aware of the shortcomings, in at least their speech pipeline, and things are slowly improving. And I'm sure with that, price and cost will also improve as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. So it's just gradual transition as they bring all the tools together.
Yeah, keep in mind, it's still a pre-release or beta
Yes,
release from OpenAI. They haven't even made it generally available.
I know. We talk about it, it's like it's just generally available, and it's like, guys, this is just out of the the factory. This isn't the paint isn't even dry. So
Yeah.
one of the things that
Another thing,
I'll go
just
for it.
just because it's stuck in my brain, OpenAI's model is a true speech-to-speech model. Some of the other providers, maybe 11 Labs and DeepGram, they're not really true speech-to-speech models in that there is still a traditional LLM, in the mix, and there's
Yes,
still a transcription pipeline, and there's still a text-to-speech pipeline. It's just that they've sort of consolidated all that into a black box that they have much more control over.
yeah,
There's a lot of sort of talk about calling certain things speech to speech. They're not really speech to speech. It's just sort of a black box that you don't have to wire up yourself.
that's a very good point because it's fashionable. Everybody sees it as the latest and greatest, so you just package up what you've got, so you can use that label on there as well. So that's a good point. I'd forgotten about that piece. Now, oh, wow, it seems like an age ago, but it wasn't that long ago. DeepSeek hit the news cycle, and everybody was talking about it. It's backed off for at least on LinkedIn. You see a few references to it, but I am starting to see it pop up in some commercial products as well. So I'm just interested, and we'll start with you, Lyle. What your perspective is on DeepSeek? Have you played with it? What you think?
Yeah. I've played quite a bit with it. Hey, I think competition is great. The more competition, the better,
Fully
especially for
agree.
LLMs.
Yeah,
We saw a new Llama release
that's
from
right.
Meta
Yep.
just last week. There's constantly things coming down the pipeline. I think maybe I said this last time we talked, but people need to really wrap their mind around the fact that the cost of intelligence is going to zero.
Yes.
And, anything that can be automated will be automated. But we're still at the very early, the very early part of the adoption curve.
Yes.
And with us specializing in voice and SMS conversations, the ability to do sort of deep research and things like that, while on a phone call isn't necessarily what customers are actually asking for.
Hmm.
But I could see how that would change with certain targeted use cases, that
Exactly.
customers could demand. So, hey, we're riding the wave, and the
Yep.
wave's still getting bigger. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot more new things come through the pipeline over the next few years.
Exactly. And you're in one of these sort of you're fortunate positions where you've built your product to be easy to resell. So, like a UCaaS or a CSaaS or CPaaS company, they can take Vita and then apply it. Where
No, it's
they see.
exit. It's another exit for Lyle coming because basically they're not going to be able to build what he's
Yeah,
done, and he's
yeah.
going to end up selling another company. So Lyle,
Well,
congratulations on another exit.
no plans to sell, especially while the wave is building.
Yeah,
Well, I'm not saying you
exactly.
have I'm not saying you have plans to it, but at the end of the day, if all those players, and I know I follow the guys at CCA and some of those companies, and they're out looking at. We just had Simwit on. They're presenting an AI solution down there at the CCA event, the Cloud Communications Alliance event, and a lot of those companies they got a lot of cash, and what are they going to do? They're going to find a Lyle, and
Well,
so I think
I,
timing
I
is everything.
think I think that. Just as I was saying earlier, customers are beginning to ask for
Yeah.
AI voice agents because they're seeing them. Maybe they have a friend that got one. Who knows what threw it on their radar, but they're
Yeah.
beginning to ask, and the bigger UCaaS players are beginning to wake up to the reality that, hey, the 350 million IVRs that are out there are not going to exist in the same way
Nope.
that they do today. They're going to become AI phone agents. The voicemail boxes attached to UCaaS seats are not going to be these dumb UCAS boxes. They're going to actually do things and
Yeah.
almost act as an assistant that answered your phone when you couldn't answer it. All those things are going to be built out. We're very, very focused on integration points with the UCAS ecosystem.
Yeah.
As an example, our AI agents can register as a VoIP device, to a UCAS seat. And,
Yeah.
from the UCAS perspective, they look just like a registered Polycom of the network or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think expanding the integration capabilities with existing products and services that are being sold in the market is going to be critical.
Yeah.
Enterprise is not going to adopt vertically integrated voice AI agents for restaurants, or vertically integrated voice AI agents for legal or whatever.
Yeah.
These companies have customers across the entire enterprise ecosystem, from A to Z,
Yeah.
types of businesses, and they're going to need AI products and services that can be integrated with their existing things that they're selling.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a replacement, it's an addition. So have you seen an uptick in people approaching you for resell?
Yeah, absolutely, especially from the MSP side.
Oh,
I think
okay.
maybe last time, we talked, we were surprised that one of our first big partnerships was a CRM company.
Hmm.
A CRM company that decided that they want to offer an AI voice agent alongside their CRM offering, so that their customers, when they miss their calls, the CRM automatically gets updated and
Yeah.
appointments automatically get scheduled and jobs automatically get assigned and queued. But we're definitely seeing the MSPs come in. And these are, folks that are selling NetSapiens seats,
Yeah.
BroadSoft seats, Metaswitch seats, whatever platform they have.
Yes.
One of our agents just registers as a VoIP extension and things just work.
Excellent. Cool. Now, Rob, you're working on very interesting projects. So interested what you're seeing in this space.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo a lot of that.
Yeah.
I mean, rewinding to that DeepSeek question, because I was
Yeah.
intrigued. DeepSeek is a reasoning model.
Yeah.
It's a conversational model.
Yeah.
And, one of the first things we did when it kind of arrived on the scene was kind of integrating with it, but it's too slow. And
Okay.
folks generally don't want to call a reasoning model.
Yeah.
I don't want someone that's going to analyze my stock portfolio on a telephone.
Yeah.
What I generally want, and the big use case, is effectively folks who want to use an LLM as the kind of glue between their internal business operating systems and the conversations their customers want to have with them. So,
Okay.
if you kind of think about how something like an offshore call center works, the reality of how that works is that you can buy that in as a commodity. You give the agents within that access to, probably some of your internal systems, but in reality, they're just your external systems. If you kind of look at the
Yeah.
level of agency, if you pardon the pun, that you give to those agents, the reality is it's no more agency than an end user going to the website would generally have. So, I
Yeah.
can call up my mobile company, but all they're going to do is generally have an agent go through the same stuff that I can execute on the website. So
Gotcha.
I think that first passive integration, certainly the stuff that we saw in the first kind of year or so, was around just this idea of taking an LLM and letting it be the glue and, introducing some function calling, so the function calling can transact business. So the whole world has gone beyond the, I'll just write a prompt and I'll have that, tell
Yeah.
you what hours are or anything like that, complete with hallucinations. And all of the work that's going on is around those integrations, how I can actually transact business through this thing, how I can call into RAG databases to have it tell my customers more, but essentially treating it really like that offshore agent that's just this kind of glue between that electronic system and the customer calling up angry on a Monday morning because something doesn't work.
Yeah.
So getting that user out of their hair and getting them into that back end system, and
Interesting.
escalating if they really do need a human being who's got actual agency, just the same as you would to an escalation agent. So so far so good. But
So
actually
offshore agents, are you seeing them being replaced at the moment?
oh, absolutely for sure.
Gotcha.
And at the other end, at the proper SME end, the kind of folks that don't even have that kind of facility,
Yeah.
you start to see that. At 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, I had an answer phone or an
Yeah.
iVar or something that just transcribed to a mailbox, and then I came in on Monday morning to, I employ admin people to go through 200 emails on a Monday morning, each of which has got a transcription of an attachment. So we're certainly seeing that first step as being I want something I can turn on at Friday night.
Yeah.
5 p.m. And I can use for overflow capability and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Gotcha.
I mean that is not the end game.
No.
Building things so you've got this thing, you've got the real low integration thing going on in the SME space. In the mid end and above, you've got some quite sophisticated integrations where you're spending man weeks of professional services time handcrafting these things that do tools calls and are very constrained in what they can do.
Yeah.
An obvious example I can think is a very high-end restaurant booking system where you want to get most of the stuff off, kind of like 90% through the agent, but the 10% of real high value stuff, I've got a party of 20 and I want to, you kind of want to move into a real agent, and it's worth spending, if it's a real, large number of locations, restaurant brand, it's worth spending weeks and weeks integrating for something like that. But I think the bit that we're starting to see is that middle space where we're getting semi-sophisticated integrations going on in the kind of mid-end, so SME to mid-end. And I think that might be an area where we do start to see vertical integrations coming in, where there's the voice AI for restaurants, the voice AI for car mechanic businesses or whatever.
Gotcha.
But I am going to echo the stuff that Lyle said about accessibility and integration with things like your phone systems is key here.
Yeah.
And I love the cool idea about just having it register instead of a Polycom on your PABX or your. I think that's just such a neat way of doing this, because of course all the voice AI. If you look at what OpenAI are doing, what people like Fixie are doing with Ultravox, everyone is sort of, oh no, okay, there are these weird voice people over here, and we've got this voice model, so we better give them a telephone interface. Twilio. And they stick a Twilio WebSocket on it and go, brilliant, we've got kind of voice tied out, which is great. But for all sorts of reasons, people don't necessarily want to be shoehorned down that route.
Exactly.
Cents per minute being the primary one, but also, if I'm not already a Twilio customer, do I really want to go off and make that part of the mix? So the idea of making all this stuff super accessible, you can work with any SIP trunk, and providing shadow inbound numbers and all of that kind of stuff is a big part of accessibility in the SME space. So I applaud that that feature that you've got there. I think that's a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, Lyle's been at this for a while now. So Lyle, you mentioned Llama. So have you had a chance to play with it? That was a new release.
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Lyle. Yeah.
I poked at it a little bit. It's a big model. It's kind of slow.
Yeah.
Unless depending on what you're running it on.
Yeah.
Not necessarily great, for phone calls. But again, every little improvement and everything the industry learns, makes everyone else improve.
How do you think it compares to Google?
Probably not quite as good, in terms of like intelligence per unit of compute. But they're all a little different, and you have to prompt them a little differently.
Gotcha.
But hey, having such a large open source model is just a boon, to everyone. And what Facebook or what Meta is doing by opening up everything, they're giving humanity a gift. And honestly, if you'd asked me that this was going to be coming from Zuckerberg, I probably would have laughed in your face 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But, we've seen him turn into a jiu-jitsu bro, we've seen him turn into a surfer bro that grows
That's
his
right.
own beef in Hawaii. So
Yeah.
he's transforming, from his previous Android persona into, I don't know, world AI savior, or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's a big impact. It's that sort of protection against the tech, community and trying to create their monopolies. And Rob, have you had a chance to play around with the latest version of Llama? Compare it to some of the other platforms, or
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Llama. In fact, one of my favorite voice models is, and I'm sorry I've said this or that, I'm not promoting Ultravox here, but actually I love it.
yeah,
Principally because it's a voice tokenizer straight on the front of Llama.
gotcha.
Down in the single digit cents per minute as well.
Yes, yeah,
And run on
great.
your own hardware. So, what's not to absolutely love about this?
Yeah,
Now, yeah, with a 70 billion parameter front end model, you have to work a bit harder in your prompting and your tool calling. But I would kind of contend actually that if the quality of your voice interface is down to which LLM you're using, if you are that sensitive and you're reliant on a particular piece of inferencing from the latest Gemini or the latest OpenAI,
yeah,
that your service simply doesn't work if you're not doing that, that you're doing something wrong.
yeah,
I think actually getting the prompting and the tools calls small enough that you can use it in an environment like Llama, and particularly in a speech-to-speech version of Llama, effectively, then you can build something that's very tight. You can build something that you can run on your own infrastructure, and you can build something that's open source. And that's absolutely perfect to me. That's what we kind of should be doing, basically.
I agree.
If the entire, if you're building a service and all of the value sits in OpenAI or all of the value sits in Google, what are you actually selling? Where's your market value there?
Exactly.
Whereas if you're putting the wrapper around to get that same performance out of an open source model, which, to be honest, is what we spend 90% of our time doing, then you're creating real value there, but the customer can pick it up and running on VLLM, run it on their own infrastructure if they need to, which opens up a whole load of application areas that are completely inaccessible to stuff that's kind of hosted in a Google data center or an OpenAI data center.
No, it is. It's significant. So jumping on to MPC, we've already mentioned it, but I'm just the thing I see mentioned time and time again is around security. So, Rob, do you see it a significant issue, or it's just one of those problems that'll get solved relatively quickly?
There's a whole load of choices of MCP about what sources you bring into your to your LLM, right? And MCP is really just tool calling on ACID. It's tool calling with automated discovery, effectively.
Okay.
And it has all the same OAuth problems, all the same authentication problems. There is no authentication there as tool calling has. So there is an unsolved piece about what data you give your agent access to. And we solve that in tool calling by, moving proprietary keys around or whatever. That isn't kind of baked into MCP, but there are ways around it by having the server proxy and having the client proxy and all of that. So putting your own wrappers on it. Yeah, absolutely. And, part of any architecture is figuring out what data sources you are going to give your agent access to, which ones you aren't, and for each individual agent, actually, what endpoints and what functions it has access to. And this kind of models that whole outsourced call center model that I still find it quite useful to get my head around, that, an individual untrusted agent can't read your credit card number off. And write it down and sell it to his mates down the pub or whatever. And it's exactly that sort of thing, that you treat your LLM as that untrusted agent. You only give it access to MCP sources or tools calling sources because they essentially do the same thing. The data that you send back is about as much as you would give any other untrusted thing or any
Gotcha.
other entrusted human. Now, there may be different layers of agents, perhaps using reasoning models, perhaps better constrained algorithmically in other ways that you might give slightly more access, like, the ability to write off a customer balance or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. That piece around not just the can I access this MCP server at all? What authentication does my LLM have to do that? But also the fine-grainedness of what am I allowing this agent to do with my data and my customer database versus this agent over here. So there's and it mirrors the whole thing that kind of we've been doing for decades in computing anyway, about compartmentalized and all of that kind of thing.
Gotcha. And Lyle, within your project within sort of EDA, are you looking at MCP?
Yeah, we're definitely integrating MCP into our agents. I would say alongside, we're also rolling out sort of an open platform that allows people to sort of submit their own integrations that work, work with our agents out of the box. There are definitely some shortcomings with MCP. As an example, I could make a MCP server that offered access to every Salesforce API function, right? But the agent interacting with Salesforce APIs directly through that MCP connection, it's not going to work well.
Yeah.
One reason is because the raw intelligence available to these LLMs, some of these API calls, are multi-step, as an example. And we're just not quite there where that's going to work well. So what you really need is you need a piece of middleware sitting in between the API and the agent to, if a particular thing you're trying to do requires 3 consecutive API calls, maybe it's a lookup and then it's an upsert and then it's like some other dip over here. You can do that all in one go, with the middleware to simplify the actual interactions that hit the agent. So we think something like that isn't a requirement like that isn't going to go away anytime soon. So we're working hard on this integrations platform that is MCP compatible. It just allows you to insert some middleware there to lessen the load on the agent. And I think also related to this is a lot of people that we talk to, they went to some voice AI provider's website and they, talk to one of the demo agents, right?
Yeah.
But these demo agents, they don't have any tool call, functionality exposed to them. They have a very basic prompt that's like, talk with this person about XYZ. Here's some information about our product, right?
Yeah.
That they probably have it plugged into a fast LLM on the other side, not necessarily a smart LLM.
Yeah.
And because of the types of calls that it's getting, you can tune the response rate to be super fast, right? Maybe half a second, response times or something.
Yeah.
But in reality, when you're actually, talking to normal people on the phone, you've got maybe 10 tool calls that, you need to be able to give to the agent. Maybe that needs to be able to send a SMS. Maybe it needs to be able to upsert a contact in your CRM. Maybe it needs to be able to store, some sort of call summary that includes some variables that the agent is in control of setting based on what happened on the call. You need a smarter LLM on the other side of that. Does that increase, response latency slightly? Yes, it probably does. But, as an example, our agents, if they get interrupted, more than once or twice, we begin automatically backing off the response time to wait for the person to finish talking. When our agents talk to, older folks, we tend to see that more often where the agent automatically backs off in its response time. So the only point that I'm making here is that a lot of people think that latency is king. That's not actually how conversations work. And if you're gaining latency, at least right now in the LLM paradigm that we exist in, you're normally paying for that latency with intelligence loss. So MCP is only making the tool calling requirements of these AI voice agents. It's raising the bar. It's not lowering the bar because it's giving them access to more and more things that they can do and more arguments that can be sent with each one of these LLM calls they're making. And all that to say, I'm excited for OpenAI to release, faster, smarter, real-time LLMs and invest less time into these reasoning models
Yes.
because, we do need more intelligence to power the tool calls that customers are beginning to demand.
Excellent. Excellent. No, that's a great point. And I agree with you. It's just fast LLM that always seems to emulate a real person, with some of the idioms, with some of the sort of, references that are made when you ask about particular topics. So you can see its focus on speed, and make it feel as natural as possible. But that's interesting because when you have that interaction, because it's close to human, you then making assumptions around how human the response can be in terms of an intelligence assumption. So that's a very good point, especially as we're adding more and more tool capabilities in this. A great point. Now, yeah, I sort of when I introduced this, as a topic, just to give us that dose of salts on where we really are. There was lots of like a Mobile World Congress at Enterprise Connect about all these wonderful capabilities, but the thing that wasn't discussed was business case and what is the key or the first use case that should be applied. So I'm just interested in your perspectives. I'm going to jump to you, Rob, on what do you see as the business case around voice AI and some of the initial use cases that are, from your perspective, a no-brainer already today?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious use case is the one about automating the mass of transactions against either a website or voice or telephone call, actually,
Yeah,
and allowing you to focus your human resources where you really need to. So whether that's, kind of outbound sales, inbound sales, dealing with the massive inquiries in an intelligent way, and then filtering so that, that 10% of calls that really do need human attention, you're putting your human resources onto. That's kind of where we are now.
gotcha.
And, there's this obvious ski ramp that we're heading towards where, kind of effectively all of that transactional stuff is getting run through AIs effectively. And where we hit an edge case, we just train on the edge case and automate it until we get better and better and better.
Okay,
And, there's an obvious ski ramp there to drastic cost reduction in the surface area of organizations. Absolutely.
gotcha.
Sure. And the part we're seeing right now is, I want an agent that sits on my website, lets us, I don't know, if it's a sales agent, lets us schedule appointments or demos in a calendar, lets us do a little bit of selling, and lets us do some frontline filtering to get the high value leads into a real human being for follow up.
Yeah,
And that's the kind of the gateway drug, if you like, that gets into that. And then the next thing is, yeah, we can automate away some of your customer service or vice versa. None of it is perfect right now, but a lot of
mhm.
it is as good and certainly cheaper than putting mass numbers of human beings on that job. And a big value thing that we certainly see is if you can take a particular transaction flow, can you deal with that via a WebRTC widget that's embedded in our website and on the telephone, essentially through the same agent, although some nuances on the kind of
Yes.
front end. And that, that's the stuff that's getting implemented today for sure. And it's certainly the stuff that's getting implemented today that telcos will see. So people that are in the telco channel, if you've not already got a product in that space, your customers are going to be buying it from someone else.
Exactly.
Once they bought it from someone else, who are they going to be buying their SIP minutes from? Because it ain't going to be you anymore, because you're just a commodity SIP minute provider, right?
Exactly. So, but what sort of quantification do you put around it? It's like, well, if you've got, like 5 people employed, it extends, you doubled your sales workforce, or, what sort of quantification? Because there are prices that are being applied from some of the large vendors on some of the claims they're making, and it's not cheap. So I'm just trying to get a feel for what you see as, potential savings, a number that you could quote for a particular business.
I'm not going to go there on that.
Okay.
And while you're asking the question, I would love to directly answer it and say you can knock, 50% off your interest cost or something like that. But actually, that's not what I particularly or we focus on. I'm far more interested in increasing capability.
Understood.
I'm far more interested in, kind of allowing an SME to expand its sales reach and selling it on that basis, or to allow an SME to deliver better customer service by eliminating a lot of the automated stuff. So it's actually about increasing business capability. I see as
okay. Gotcha.
I absolutely see the reason for the question. And I am absolutely certain there are folks wandering around going, we can just kill this call center over here. We'll fire them all on Monday morning and we'll put them into my AI and I'll charge you half as much.
Exactly.
I don't see that as a particularly kind of positive piece of business, but I'm sure there's a lot of money to be made there.
Yeah, because there are some claims that are thrown out there, but unfortunately, we have Doge, and there's a lot of uncertainty, because again, small medium business, especially if they're using, offshoring, they know the costs, they know how difficult it was to get everything set up, so it's not a hard. I would say for some of the businesses I see out there, it's like, they see, well, we can reduce this cost by sort of 50% and expand our capabilities by, a more modest sum, because they see it's going to take time to accelerate. But that creates that reticence. It's like, well, can we trial? Can we just play with this? Can we get a feel for? And that whole transition, it takes time, and it requires, to be honest, both the vendor and the enterprise that's implementing it time to basically train up and deal with all the processes that they're having to, modify potentially. So yeah, okay, I understand why you're not answering it. It's just, people keep knocking on my door and saying, Alan, what are people achieving at the moment?
Yeah, and I think kind of part of that is that the whole how do I do contact center is really mature.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter whether it's a sort of a Mar and Par SME or Unilever or whatever.
Yeah.
There's either an organically grown understanding of how they do customer contact because they've kind of learned as an organization, and they know how to quantify the costs and where the diminishing returns are on putting more resource into that area, or there's a complete playbook for it that is utterly quantified with KPIs and metrics. That's not where we are yet.
Correct.
A lot of this stuff, because the technology is moving so quickly that the stuff that I could sell to someone last August was absolutely rubbish compared to the stuff that I can sell them now. And I'm quite convinced that the stuff I'm going to be able to sell them in 5 months' time will be utterly different to the stuff we're selling now. So that kind of maturity of process of being able to say, our stuff right now will deliver you a 50% saving or whatever. You probably can say that. I mean, you can make up any number you like if you try.
Exactly, but it is sort of making it up, with a bit, with your fingers crossed and hoping that basically everything works. Because it very much the company implementing it has a big dependency on the success of the projects as well. So Lyle, what's your view?
A few comments on this topic. I mean, I generally agree with Rob. Like, it's really hard to draw a perfect circle around, savings across an entire industry, businesses like that. But, I do have some anecdotal things. For example, with our CRM partner, their customers are service businesses, roof installers, service companies, things like that. And these businesses, at least the ones that are, not super small, they have employees, they're paying something like $2,500 a month to have their phones answered by, an overseas call center after hours, or something like that. Right. And, they can buy an agent that does that for $500, $600, $700, something like
Yeah.
that. And that's real savings for those businesses. And I do expect, that sort of comparison to continue to happen,
Yeah.
especially as agents get better at integrating into the software that these businesses use.
Yeah.
However, I think that, maybe the bigger sort of sea change that I think is happening is not necessarily about, costs coming down for handling calls or money being redirected from call centers into an AI agent vendor. I think it's going to come down a lot to the incentives of the underlying call center software provider or the underlying MSP provider that powers
Okay.
the phone system,
Yeah.
or the UCaaS vendor,
Yeah.
that is selling this business communication software. Because think about it, for the past 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, the entire telecommunications industry, including UCaaS and CCaaS and CPaaS and everything else,
Yeah.
it's just a constant story of margin compression,
Yes.
and and revenue compression. And think about, okay, I'm a UCaaS vendor, right? One of my big customers has a core problem with their business. They need their calls answered after hours, and or they need their calls answered in general, right?
Yeah.
And right now, they don't really have a solution to offer that business other than sort of the connectivity itself,
Yes.
right? Or maybe the call center software itself, and then all the money that is going toward the call center employees, right? They don't see any of that money, right? It's in a completely separate world. But now suddenly with AI agents and software, these companies have giant incentives to adopt AI agents so that
Yeah.
they can drive their own wedge in the middle of that, in the middle of that cost expenditure, even if
Exactly.
it's a lowering, of how much that business is spending on cost. Right now, they're seeing none of it, right? They are seeing
Exactly.
none of that at revenue. And now suddenly they have the opportunity to sell a customer something that they can make 15 cents a minute on, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Telecom industry hasn't seen 15 cents a minute in 30 years,
Yeah.
and the sales guys that work for these companies, right? You better believe that they are thinking about the commissions and things that they can
Yeah.
make by selling, an AI agent at 15 cents a minute. So, a lot of this adoption is going to be driven by the incentives of the underlying connectivity providers who begin to sell solutions to this problem. And it's not, we're still at the very beginning of that.
Yeah.
The UCaaS vendors are still waking up. There's not a single one that has an AI voice agent solution built into their
Yeah.
offering. But that will change because of these incentives that are changing.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Excellent. Thank you so much, Lyle. So we're coming up on time. So
I gotta say something.
go for it.
While I was talking about seeing none of that, first of all, Lyle, I want some of that merch. Okay. And I'm gonna go on a little bit of a merch rant. Number one, we have people coming on. Eric Troutman, where's my merch? Eddie D, where's my merch? Umail, where's my merch? Fida, I want some merch. The only merch I got is this meth hat that I got that says I love meth. Which is kind of like a joke. I got to make up my own merch. Rob, I think you should get some merch with a propeller head on it. Alan collects comic books. I want merch. You got some slick merch there. You gonna hook us up or what?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna definitely hook you up.
Come on, I'll be wearing it. Look, we have the biggest podcast in telecom because of me. But anyhow, so we have the biggest podcast with biggest viewership. I need some merch, man, and you got some slick merch.
Hey, what's the tariff on merch?
What did you say?
Well, it's free.
I said, what's the tariff on merch? I'm in the UK.
Oh dear. So
I'll send you a hat, but you'll probably get a $2,000 bill or something.
Oh yeah.
well, no, on the form, customs form, free.
Yeah, the green sticker. Yeah.
That's it. But no, guys, this was excellent. Thank you much. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing, what I found is very insightful and exciting in terms of, it's been a big change over the past 6 months, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where it's going over the next. So again, thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.
Bye now.